So we know from Verizon, they're going to be charging an additional $10 a month for 5G service. So that's at least at a minimum. That's what you would expect to see from Verizon. I wouldn't be surprised at all if AT&T, T-Mobile, Sprint did something similar.
And ultimately, I would imagine that these carriers will make more money because just more things are interacting with the network. There's more data being downloaded, et cetera.
That would be the expectation, that when you actually have more people using the technology more often, it creates the capability to have self-driving cars, more smart home, different elements like that, that you are potentially buying more technology, and you need those types of connections to run those types of things.
And while this is a big auction, as we spoke about last hour, it's not actually the best quality spectrum that the government could be auctioning off. Sprint has a lot of that spectrum currently. The stuff that Verizon and AT&T have is better in urban areas. How important is it that Sprint has the funding to roll out what the resources that they already have for 5G, and or that the government steps forward and says, all right, we're going to continue to auction off the rest of that spectrum that everybody else could then deploy?
In general, all of these major carriers need more different types of 5G spectrum. They have a little bit right now. They need a lot more. That's why this auction was called for. There was an auction fairly recently, too, but to really get this moving and to really actually make this a robust network, the government does need to get involved and sell a lot more of the spectrum.
You know, Gene, we've talked a little bit here about some of the bigger companies that are involved in this, whether it's Sprint or AT&T. But I'm wondering, if you get below the surface of those companies, which kinds of companies, which names of companies will be the ones that will be the beneficiaries because they supply the parts, they do the infrastructure build, they supply the chips and so forth?
So surprisingly, I think one of the biggest beneficiaries of all of this 5G, and I think your setup and Josh's comments in particular really emphasize the significance of this, can't understate it enough, and I think people will be tired of hearing about it, but it's a big deal. I think surprisingly one of the best plays is just really very clear in front of us, which is Apple. And let me just quickly walk through why I think that's better than playing any sort of component supplier or an antenna company or AT&T and Verizon. And the reason is this, is they have multiple opportunities. There's going to be an iPhone upgrade cycle around it, and they will also have opportunities to advance what they're doing in augmented reality. That will become a reality. And then healthcare and autonomous cars, all things that Apple has interest in. So I think that this is pretty straightforward. If you want to play it safe and really ride that wave, I think Apple's probably one of the best ways to do it.
What about their disputes with Qualcomm, Gene, which is extremely important to the deployment of 5G?
So the timing on this, I'm glad you brought it up. Likely Apple is going to be perceived as late to the game. And specifically, is they may not have a 5G phone out until potentially even the fall of 2021. I don't think that that's an issue, and part of that reason is because of what's going on with Qualcomm. Part of it is because Apple wants to vertically integrate around the chips, and so eventually they want to design that own chip and essentially move away from Qualcomm, but that takes time. They have a stalking horse in the meantime with Intel that they can work with. But I think it's going to be late to the game for Apple, so I think people who are just reading the headlines may say that my belief that Apple's a great play on 5G is off base because they may be late. But keep in mind, we probably won't have, call it 75% coverage for another few years. I know this segment here we're talking about, Trump was talking about 92 cities, and that doesn't really mean anything. What matters is the total coverage. And so I think that even if Apple doesn't come out with a 5G phone for another year and a half, I think that they will be squarely in that wheelhouse without Qualcomm.
Ben, you want to comment on that? To Tyler's point, who are the suppliers, the players who are best positioned to take advantage of this?
At this point, I see a lot of the carriers being huge beneficiaries of this. They're the ones that are actually going to be charging consumers directly, and they're going to be charging businesses as well.